Welcome back to Summary Central. Today we are diving into The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which might be the most important book of the decade if you have ever looked at a teenager and thought, why do they seem like they're running Windows 95 on hardware that was designed for Windows XP? This book is not doom and gloom, it's not fear-mongering, it's not a nostalgic rant about kids these days. It is a carefully explained, deeply researched, and honestly kind of heartbreaking walkthrough of how childhood quietly transformed from something that happened out there in the world to something that happens in here, inside a glowing rectangle the size of a Pop-Tart. And here's the weird part. Nobody planned it. Nobody approved it. Nobody tested it. It just happened. One generation grew up climbing trees, scraping knees, having friendships that involved actual eye contact, and knocking on doors to ask if someone could come out and play. The next generation grew up indoors, online, on social media, inside a never-ending digital carnival where every moment is broadcast, judged, compared, edited, filtered, and preserved forever. No pressure. Before we begin, do a quick tap on not out of obligation, but because it really does tell the algorithm that you enjoy long existential rambles about the collapse of modern society that somehow still feel comforting. And subscribe so you do not miss next week's emotional crisis, wrapped neatly in a book summary. Today's structure is simple. We're doing 5 big emotional movements. The shattering of the old childhood. How fear built the bubble, how phones replaced reality, why Gen Z broke first, rebuilding a real life. Think of this as a guided tour through the last 40 years of cultural evolution, except instead of a museum guide whispering, on your left is a fossilized lunchbox from 1987, it's me telling you why everyone under 30 feels like they're carrying a small storm cloud inside their chest. Let's begin. Section 1. The shattering of the old childhood. Let's start with a little time travel, not the sci-fi kind, just the remember oxygen that wasn't recirculated through an HVAC system kind. Once upon a time, children roamed the earth freely. Not metaphorically, literally. They went outside, wandered aimlessly, made questionable ramps out of plywood and stolen milk crates, and played games with rules that were negotiated, renegotiated, abandoned, rediscovered, and argued about again. There were no group chats, no location sharing, no instant messaging. If you wanted to find your friends, you checked the usual spots or followed the trail of chaotic noise. And here's the important part. Childhood back then was lived, not managed. Adults were around, sure, but they weren't omnipresent supervisors. They didn't narrate children's emotional states. They didn't mediate every conflict. They weren't standing 3 feet away during playtime like FBI surveillance agents. There were boundaries, but they were breathable. You could test them. You could stretch them. And sometimes you overstretched them and came home with a bruise or a story or both. This wasn't bad parenting. This was normal. Kids built resilience by actually doing things, messy things, risky things, social things, stupid things. Childhood was a training ground for adulthood, and the curriculum was written by the children themselves. Now here is where everything starts bending. By the late 1980s, and especially the 90s, a slow cultural tremor began. Parents became more anxious, even though the world was not actually becoming more dangerous. News became more dramatic, more emotional, more obsessed with rare tragedies. A single story could dominate the entire national imagination. And humans are very bad at properly assessing risk. What we see vividly feels more real than what we know statistically. So the rare and shocking started to feel common and imminent, and the quiet, boring, true safety of everyday life faded from our perception. Parental fear increased, slowly, silently, year after year. Kids still played outside, but a little less. They had more supervised activities, but fewer unstructured afternoons. They were driven places instead of walking. They stayed indoors more because it felt safer. And again, none of this was done maliciously. Parents were trying to protect their kids. Culture was shifting. Safety norms were shifting. Schools became more liability aware. Communities became more suspicious. Childhood was still recognizable, but it was shrinking around the edges, like an island losing shoreline over time. You don't notice the first few meters disappearing, but eventually, the tide reaches your front door. Then came the tipping point. Indoor childhood replaced outdoor childhood, not because children suddenly hated grass, but because indoor life had become more comfortable, more supervised, more structured, and importantly, just more convenient. And then the real plot twist, indoor childhood became digital childhood. That shift was fast, like astronomically fast, human history fast. But before we get to the phones, we need to understand the emotional infrastructure that made the digital takeover possible. And that emotional infrastructure was built entirely out of fear. Section 2. How fear built the bubble. Fear is persuasive. Fear feels rational even when it isn't. Fear makes you believe you're being a responsible parent when you're actually just trying to calm your own nervous system. Let's imagine you are a parent in 1992. You let your kid walk to school. So does everyone else. It's normal. Now imagine you're a parent in 2005. You let your kid walk to school. Someone calls you brave, or reckless, or relaxed, which is the passive-aggressive way of telling someone they're doing something socially questionable. 1 decade apart. Same decision. Different meaning. That's how fear works. Not instantly. Culturally. Slowly. Socially. Through norms, expectations, judgments, news cycles, and a sprinkle of parental guilt. Fear built a bubble around childhood, and everyone was doing it, so it felt correct. Parents supervised more, structured more, monitored more, intervened more. Childhood became curated, managed, soothed out like a risk-free simulation. But here's the paradox Haidt emphasizes. Children do not grow by being protected from every challenge. They grow by meeting challenges that match their developmental stage. Kids didn't need total freedom. They needed small risks, appropriate risks, human risks, arguments with friends that teach negotiation, tree climbing that teaches body awareness, wandering in groups that teaches planning and responsibility, getting lost a little, then getting unlost, making mistakes without adults swooping in. This is how the emotional immune system develops. And when you take these opportunities away, children don't become safer. They become less capable of dealing with the real world when they inevitably encounter it. Fear told parents, protect your children from discomfort. But resilience grows through discomfort, not away from it. Fear said, the world is dangerous. But the real world is also the only place where kids develop competence. Fear said, keep them close. But closeness without autonomy turns into dependence, not confidence. Now here's the bitter irony. Just as real-world risks were disappearing from childhood, an infinitely more dangerous world was quietly knocking on the front door. No stranger on the street. No unsafe neighborhood. No physical threat. A glowing portal. A little touchscreen. A pocket-sized vortex packed with algorithms, strangers, comparison traps, sexual content, social metrics, unfiltered feedback, and 24-hour access to everyone's best moments and worst opinions. Parents, wanting safety, opened the front door and handed their children the internet. Not out of negligence, out of love, out of a desire to protect. Real risks were minimized. Digital risks were maximized. Childhood stayed protected in the physical world, but became exposed mentally in ways no prior generation had ever experienced. And that is how the bubble formed. Not through bad parenting, but through a cultural misunderstanding of what children actually need. Now let's talk about the takeover. Section 3. How phones replaced reality. If the first two sections were about the erosion of childhood, this is the moment everything collapses and rebuilds into something unrecognizable. Up until now, the story has been gradual. Cultural shifts, parental anxiety, social norms tightening like a seatbelt across a whole generation. But the arrival of the smartphone wasn't gradual. It was a sucker punch. Between 2010 and 2015, something unprecedented happened. Human behavior didn't merely evolve, it mutated. Childhood didn't transition, it teleported. Kids didn't just use phones, phones became the operating system of their lives. Let's slow this down, because it's easy to underestimate how massive this transformation actually was. Imagine someone walks into a classroom in 1998. They tell the students, in about 12 years, you will all carry a device that contains a camera better than any Hollywood movie from the 80s, a global stage to broadcast yourself, instant communication with your entire social universe, and a slot machine that pays out in dopamine instead of money. Every child would think, that sounds incredible. Every adult today knows, oh, that was the beginning of our collective meltdown. The smartphone wasn't just a gadget, it was an environmental redesign. How it happened so fast. Here's the unbelievable part. Within 5 years, almost every teenager in the developed world had a smartphone. Kids who used to spend time together in person were suddenly spending time together alone, each staring into a hyper-stimulating, algorithmically tuned feed designed to hold their attention hostage. Before smartphones, childhood was mostly local. Your world was your neighborhood, your school, your soccer team, your weird cousin who collected bottle caps for reasons he couldn't articulate. After smartphones, childhood became global and performative. Suddenly, every awkward moment had an audience. Every opinion had a comment section. Every social interaction had analytics. This is not a small upgrade. This is an entirely new species of adolescence. Outdoor play lost the war effortlessly. Phones didn't have to fight for children's attention. They won immediately. A child deciding between, should I go outside, maybe get cold, maybe be bored, maybe negotiate a game with other humans who have their own opinions, versus, should I stay indoors and be entertained by a stream of content designed by professional attention engineers? It's not even a fair fight. Outdoor play was like dial-up internet. Smartphones were like broadband for the soul. Kids traded movement for stillness, faces for screens, nature for pixels, real conversations for texting apps, social intuition for emojis, exploration for consumption, boredom for overstimulation. Childhood changed shape. Not because kids suddenly disliked the outdoors, but because smartphones made everything else feel less vibrant by comparison. Social media wasn't a platform. It was a habitat. Smartphones created the habitat. Social media engineered the food chain. Once platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and later everything else emerged, social life moved onto a stage with lighting, scoring, feedback, and an invisible audience of hundreds or thousands watching your every move. Even kids who didn't want to be on social media ended up there indirectly because their friends were posting pictures of them. Suddenly, childhood became chronic self-awareness. What do people think of me? Became, what do people think of me every minute of the day? A huge leap. Before smartphones, comparison had limits. You compared yourself to kids you saw in real life. Maybe 20? Maybe 50? If you were in a big school, a few hundred. Now you're comparing yourself to the most attractive, wealthy, charismatic, edited, filtered, curated, algorithmically boosted people on the planet. And you're doing it before your brain fully finishes building the circuits responsible for emotional regulation. Phones didn't just replace free time, they replaced identity formation, the always on problem. One of the most psychologically damaging aspects of phone-based childhood is the lack of downtime. Childhood used to have natural breaks, walking home from school, sitting in class while zoning out at the whiteboard, standing in line at lunch. Those small gaps in stimulation were mental recovery periods. Now every empty moment is filled. Waiting was scrolling. Boredom was scrolling. Loneliness was scrolling. Awkwardness was scrolling. Fatigue was scrolling. Even feelings themselves are avoided through scrolling. There's no mental off switch, only continuous stimulation, which interrupts emotional processing, sleep, and the ability to develop a stable internal sense of self. A kid today doesn't simply rest, they switch apps. Childhood went from private to public. This is the part adults underestimate most. Growing up used to be a private process. You made mistakes quietly. You experimented with identity quietly. You changed your mind quietly. Now everything a child does is potentially permanent, screenshotable, reshareable, and judgeable by peers. The result is a generation that feels watched even when they're alone. Phones turn childhood into a reality show where you are both the actor and the audience, and so is everyone else. And then came sleep collapse. Kids need sleep the way adults need coffee and one emotionally stable friend. But phones wreck sleep schedules without mercy. Notifications, blue light, stress, FOMO, the adrenaline spike of social drama at 11:46 p.m., it all compounds. A tired brain is an anxious brain. And Gen Z has been tired for a decade straight. And here's the heartbreaking thing. Kids didn't choose any of this. We handed it to them. We normalized it. We encouraged it. We praised it. We built their entire social world into it. Now they are stuck trying to form a stable identity while living inside a digital amusement park that never closes. Phones didn't just enter childhood. They replaced the real-world developmental tasks childhood was supposed to handle. Which leads us to the question everyone is afraid to ask. Why did Gen Z break so dramatically and so fast? Because they were the first generation to develop inside this new habitat. And this habitat was not designed for the human brain. Let's open that up. Section 4. Why Gen Z broke first. All right, deep breath. This is the part of the story where the camera pans over the current generation, the music gets a little tragic but still hopeful, and you start thinking about every teenager you know and wondering how on earth they are functioning. Because here is the uncomfortable truth we have to lay out gently. But honestly, Gen Z didn't break because they are fragile. They broke because they were the first humans ever asked to grow up inside an environment that did not support human development. They were the beta test of a new childhood. A childhood without downtime, without privacy, without boredom, without unsupervised play, without real social risk, without organic identity formation, without a reliable boundary between me and what everyone thinks of me. Imagine trying to build a house on a foundation that keeps rearranging itself. That is adolescence in the smartphone era. Let's talk about how this played out and why different groups felt the damage differently. Girls broke in the spotlight. Boys broke in the shadows. If you look at the data, and honestly, if you talk to any teacher, counselor, youth pastor, or random person with teenagers in their family, you'll notice something. Girls experienced a sharp rise in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and social stress. Boys experienced a sharp rise in withdrawal, loneliness, and disengagement. Same storm, different vulnerabilities. Why girls were hit earliest and hardest. Think about the way social media works. It is a visual platform built around personal presentation, social feedback, and subtle relational cues. It's a never-ending fashion show mixed with a popularity contest, mixed with a public diary written in disappearing messages and emojis that all mean different things depending on what microculture you belong to. This is the perfect storm for adolescent girls. Not because girls are dramatic or obsessed with appearances, because adolescent female development is deeply shaped by relationships, perception, and social belonging. The female brain, especially during puberty, is exquisitely tuned to interpret microsignals, tone, expression, attention, inclusion, exclusion, social hierarchy. Now, transplant that brain into a hyper-stimulating virtual world where everyone posts their best angles, everyone filters their imperfections, everyone curates their personality, everyone silently judges everything, and every moment has a built-in scoreboard. That's not adolescence. That's emotional gladiator school. In the physical world, a girl might compare herself to a few peers. In the digital world, she compares herself to thousands of optimized strangers. In the physical world, rejection hurts but heals. In the digital world, rejection is archived, screenshot, replayed, and discussed. In the physical world, friendships evolve through presence and conflict. In the digital world, friendships evolve through text bubbles, streaks, emoji interpretations, and algorithmic visibility. Girls didn't break because they were weak. They broke because the environment attacked their strengths: connection, sensitivity, awareness, empathy, attunement. Social media turned those strengths into vulnerabilities. Why, boys weren't okay either. Boys had a different trajectory. While girls were being crushed under the weight of constant social evaluation, boys quietly slipped away from the real world. They didn't get pulled into endless social comparison. They got absorbed into endless digital alternatives. Video games, YouTube, Reddit, Discord, Twitch, anime forums, online friend groups, virtual adventure replacing physical adventure. None of these things are bad in moderation. But moderation isn't what happened. Replacement happened. Instead of learning how to talk to people in real life, boys learned how to talk to avatars. Instead of figuring out how to handle conflict face to face, they learned to mute people. Instead of getting better at flirting or being awkward around someone they liked, they learned to consume a curated fantasy of intimacy online that required zero courage and provided zero emotional nutrition. A boy today can be social for 8 hours straight without ever using his voice. He can escape boredom instantly. He can avoid discomfort entirely. He can choose reward without challenge, progress without failure, and connection without vulnerability. But here's the tragic catch. You cannot build confidence without friction. You cannot build competence without awkwardness. You cannot build masculinity without responsibility. Therefore, I will return it unchanged. So boys didn't explode emotionally the way girls did. They imploded quietly. Loneliness became the default. Inactivity replaced exploration. Fear of rejection replaced the pursuit of connection. Porn replaced relationships. Confusion replaced identity. This isn't laziness, it's developmental starvation. But the core issue isn't gender. It's timing. Gen Z was the very first generation to go through puberty with smartphones, social media, instant messaging, infinite comparison, infinite entertainment, infinite distraction, infinite social exposure, but zero preparation. Previous generations got phones after they already had a self. Gen Z got phones before their self had taken shape. This is like pouring concrete into a mold that's still liquid. Of course, the structure comes out wobbly. Puberty is supposed to be the phase where a young person slowly constructs an identity. Quietly. Privately. Experimentally. Now imagine doing that while being live streamed to your peers. Imagine forming your self-worth while being graded by likes. Imagine learning to socialize while receiving notifications every 30 seconds. Imagine trying to build self-esteem while seeing unattainable beauty standards every 10 minutes. Imagine trying to cultivate resilience when every uncomfortable emotion can be instantly numbed by a device. Kids weren't given the developmental conditions previous generations took for granted. Haidt's central claim is simple. Nothing about Gen Z's mental health crisis is mysterious once you understand the environment they grew up in. If you spent your adolescence in a war zone, we wouldn't be shocked if you struggled later in life. Gen Z grew up in a psychological war zone, not violent, but overstimulating, intrusive, addictive, and developmentally incompatible with the human nervous system. And they are still in it. Which brings us to the most important part of the entire book. Okay? Now what? Section 5. Rebuilding a real life. At this point in the journey, it's tempting to throw your hands up and say, well, society is doomed. Let's all just live inside the algorithm and hope for the best. But that is not Haidt's message, and it is definitely not how we're closing this video. Because here's the truth that gets lost in all the doom scrolling. Human beings are unbelievably adaptable. Kids are unbelievably resilient. And childhood can be rebuilt not by going backwards, not by pretending smartphones don't exist, but by remembering what a real childhood needs and giving it back one piece at a time. This section is long because it's the heart of the book, but it's also the part that should leave you feeling calmer, more hopeful, and maybe even a little excited about what's possible. Let's take this step by step. Step 1. The real world has to become real again. The first and most crucial insight is painfully obvious once someone says it out loud. You cannot fix digital childhood with digital solutions. You can't app your way back to resilience. You can't monitor your way to independence. You can't filter your way to social competence. Those things help, but they aren't the foundation. A real childhood requires the real world. Kids need unsupervised play not for nostalgia, but because unstructured human interaction is how the brain learns difficulty, negotiation, recovery, and courage. Kids need to explore physical spaces not because, back in my day, but because physical exploration shapes identity in a way digital exploration never will. Kids need peers in front of them, not behind screens, because social intuition only forms through real-time embodied feedback. Put simply, kids need to touch the world again. And so many adults underestimate how much kids crave this. If you give children even a sliver of freedom, they take it and run. Literally, they run. They sprint outside like little golden retrievers who've been waiting all day. But here's the tricky part. You cannot create real world play for your kid alone. Play is an ecosystem. One kid alone in a yard is a kid. 2 kids is a friendship. 4 kids is a tribe. 10 kids is a society with its own justice system. Rebuilding childhood requires communities, neighborhoods, schools, churches, parks, any place where kids can simply exist together without adults orchestrating every moment. Which leads into something uncomfortable. To rebuild real childhood, adults have to loosen their grip. Step 2. Parents need to worry less, but cooperate more. This is where many parents start sweating because the idea of giving kids more freedom sounds like a plot twist in a horror movie. But remember everything we covered earlier, the world didn't become more dangerous. Our perception of it did. If you zoom out, kids today are safer than at almost any time in history. Lower crime, lower accidents, better medicine, better emergency response. We aren't rebuilding childhood for a dangerous world. We're rebuilding it for a world that's actually very safe, but suffocatingly supervised. So how do parents begin giving independence back without feeling like they're the only ones doing it? By creating shared norms. If every parent on the block agrees, we're okay with the kids biking to the park, then suddenly the risk doesn't feel like a personal gamble. It feels like a community standard. Haidt talks about this a lot. Parents don't need to be braver alone. They need to be braver together. Neighborhood groups, play clubs, school norms, mutual agreements, anything that turns independence from a controversial choice into the default again. And once a little freedom returns, you start seeing something magical. Kids stop looking like emotionally starved squirrels. They become confident, louder, goofier, more capable. You see childhood coming back to life. Step 3. Schools must stop treating adolescents like bombs. This one might sting if you work in education, but please hear it with kindness. Schools have increasingly become environments designed to minimize risk instead of build competence. No running, no climbing, no playful tackling, no roughhousing, no conflict without adult mediation, no independence in the hallways. No unstructured recess. Schools didn't get stricter because teachers wanted control. They got stricter because adults fear lawsuits, reputation damage, and that one parent who sends 18 emails because their child was mildly inconvenienced. But here's the paradox. Overprotection inside school walls makes kids less resilient outside them. When every tiny problem is treated like an emergency, kids learn that problems are emergencies. When adults intervene immediately, kids never practice the awkward, essential skill of solving things themselves. So rebuilding childhood requires schools to shift from protect mode to development mode. More recess, more play, more independence, fewer hall monitors hovering like secret agents, fewer rules that treat children like malfunctioning robots. The goal isn't chaos. The goal is competence. Kids learn self-regulation by experiencing dysregulation. Kids learn fairness by negotiating unfairness. Kids learn courage by meeting challenges, not avoiding them. Schools can be incredible incubators of resilience, but only if they stop trying to eliminate every variable that looks messy. And adolescence is messy, by design. Step 4. The smartphone rules have to change. Here we arrive at the section parents dread, teenagers resent, and tech companies hope you'll skip. Let's talk about phone rules, not because phones are evil, but because childhood cannot compete with a device engineered to be more addictive than sugar, gambling, and watching just one more episode. There are 3 core principles Haidt argues for. Principle 1. Delay the smartphone. Not forever, just long enough to let a child build a sense of self before dropping them into the digital gladiator pit. Middle school is too early. Early high school is already late for some kids. Waiting until around age 14 for a smartphone and around 16 for social media is a developmental gift disguised as an inconvenience. Kids don't need 24/7 access to the internet at age 11. They need real friendships, real life, real conflict, real play. And the kids who get that foundation, they handle smartphones far better later on. Principle 2. No phones in school. Period. Not allowed during lunch. Not only for emergencies. Not silent mode, but still in your pocket. Out of sight, out of mind, out of classroom. Phones destroy focus, relationships, and learning environments. Kids don't talk during lunch anymore because they're all scrolling like silent monks. Schools that ban phones see instant improvements in everything from grades to behavior to mental health. Phones do not belong in classrooms. They barely belong in childhood. Principle 3. Bedrooms are for sleeping, not scrolling. This is a big one. If you remove phones from bedrooms at night, you fix 80% of sleep issues, 50% of family conflict, 40% of anxiety symptoms, all of the late night doom spirals of why didn't they reply and do people hate me and let me scroll one more hour to feel something. Teenagers think they want midnight phone access, but the morning version of themselves strongly disagrees. Removing phones from bedrooms isn't punishment. It's giving kids the chance to wake up with a nervous system that isn't fried. Step 5. The internet needs speed limits. Here's the spicy part. We cannot rebuild childhood without regulating the digital environment kids live in. Not in a Big Brother way. In a seatbelts exist for a reason way. Haidt argues for age verification that actually works, default privacy protections, no algorithmic targeting of minors, limits on addictive infinite scroll features, real transparency about mental health impacts. Children should not be thrown into digital spaces designed by adults who optimize for engagement instead of well-being. Imagine a playground built by casino designers. Would you let your kid play there? Exactly. The internet is not neutral terrain. It's a profit machine. And kids are not tiny adults who can navigate it with full awareness and stable emotional boundaries. Regulation isn't anti-tech. It's pro-child. Step 6. Adolescents need real responsibilities again. This part is my favorite because it's so uplifting. Teenagers are not fragile creatures made of glass. They are walking potential. When you give them responsibilities, real ones, not token chores, they rise. They mature. They develop purpose. They start acting like the adults they're becoming. Gen Z struggles not because they're incapable, but because our society took away their opportunities to test themselves. Responsibility is the antidote to helplessness. Let adolescents work, lead, problem solve, create, build, fail, try again. Teenagers crave meaning. Phones offer stimulation, but not meaning. Real life offers meaning. We just have to let them have more of it. Step 7. Rebuild the tribe. If there's one theme that runs through the entire book, it's that kids cannot grow alone. Humans need tribes, families, neighborhoods, friend groups, mentors, communities. Isolation is a modern invention. Childhood was never meant to be solitary. To fix the anxious generation, we don't need better screens. We need better circles, more shared meals, more time outdoors, more laughing together, more grandparents involved, more siblings bonded, more intergenerational friendships, more belonging. Because the opposite of anxiety isn't calm. The opposite of anxiety is connection. Modern childhood disconnected children from the world, from each other, from the physical environment, and even from themselves. We're not rebuilding childhood. We're reconnecting it. Conclusion. Welcome back to the real world. So here we are at the end of the anxious generation. An entire generation grew up underwater, and nobody noticed the tide rising until the kids started gasping. The point of this book is not panic. It's clarity. It's understanding. It's a reminder that humans are not designed to develop inside an attention economy built by trillion-dollar companies. But it's also a reminder that childhood is not gone. It's not lost. It's not irreversibly broken. It's just buried under screens, under supervision, under fear, under convenience, under a cultural misunderstanding of what kids really need. And when you lift all that weight, even a little childhood comes rushing back like a plant that's been waiting for sunlight. Kids want freedom. Kids want exploration. Kids want friends. Kids want meaning. Kids want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Kids want life the real kind, the messy kind, the kind you can't screenshot. The digital world is not going away. Smartphones are not disappearing. Social media will exist in some form for the rest of our lives. But Haidt's message is, we don't need to throw away technology to save childhood. We just need to put the real world back on the table. More play, more independence, more responsibility, more boredom, more community, more rituals, more shared meals, more eye contact, more sleep, more life, less comparison, less surveillance, less algorithmic addiction, less isolation, less digital noise. Childhood doesn't need a software update. It needs a reboot. And here's the hopeful part. Kids aren't broken. They're untested. When you give them the environment humans evolved for, they spring back faster than you expect. They rediscover courage. They rediscover curiosity. They rediscover joy in places no app can replicate. You can't swipe your way to resilience. You can't scroll your way to identity. You can't like button your way to belonging. Those things require other living, breathing humans. And when you put kids back into real environments with real relationships, they come alive. If you're a parent watching this, you have more power than you think. If you're a teenager watching this, you have more wisdom than you know. If you're somewhere in between, you have more influence than you realize. Every family that changes the bedtime phone rule changes a child's life. Every school that locks phones away during class changes a community. Every neighborhood that reopens the outdoors changes childhood itself. Every kid who chooses real friends over digital ghosts changes the trajectory of their own adulthood. We're not trying to rebuild the past. We're trying to rebuild the conditions that make humans thrive: connection, independence, risk, meaning, community, purpose. And when you rebuild those things, childhood stops being anxious. It becomes alive again. Thank you for watching today's breakdown of the anxious generation. If this gave you something to think about, tap like it actually helps the channel reach more people who might need this message. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss the 15-minute and 5-minute versions dropping soon. Leave a comment telling us one thing you experienced growing up that kids rarely experience today. The risky thing, the fun thing, the chaotic thing, that we definitely should not have survived that thing. Those comments help the algorithm, but they also create a small sense of community right here under the video. And as always, thanks for being here. Thanks for thinking with us, and we'll see you soon for another book that makes life make a little more sense.